This program is brought to you by McGill University. Please visit us at www.mcgill.ca.
I'm a counseling psychologist, and whether you know it or whether you know anything about counseling psychology or not, counseling psychologists are people who believe in human strengths. And so when I talk to you tonight about values, values are what I believe are one of our human strengths. So this is very consistent with my identity. I'm also a psychotherapist. I've been a practicing psychotherapist for about 24 years now. And I've been a member of the faculty in the Department of Educational and Counseling Psychology for the last 10 years. Nathan alluded to my research interests. My research started looking at alliance. It looks at psychotherapeutic processes, and in particular how clients and therapists develop an alliance and how that provides a context for the therapeutic endeavor, for good things to happen in the psychotherapy session. One of the things that I noticed in my research, we did a study where we looked at alliance development processes. We asked clients very early in the therapy, what is your relationship like with your therapist? And if they told us it was good, we asked them how it got going. We asked them about special moments in the development of their relationship. And what they told us about those moments is that there were moments where they began to feel like they could open up to their therapist, where they felt like something happened that they could trust them, and that openness began to develop in the therapeutic session in a couple of ways, one of which is they were more willing to tell their therapist things, and the other one was that they were more willing to hear from their therapist, to listen to what he or she had to say, to be open to new ideas and new perspectives on what they were doing with their lives. That got me very interested in positive emotions, because it was the positive emotion that was happening in the therapeutic endeavor, and it got me interested in openness. At that point, I was also teaching a course in our program on theories of counseling and looking at the various different theories that I was training the students in. And I was looking in particular for therapies that I could talk about that had a strong evidence base. And I came upon, about 7 or 8 years ago, ACT, Acceptance and Commitment Therapy. And I started to learn about it, to read about it. I did some training in it. And it's a lot of what I'm going to be talking about tonight about values has to do and comes from an ACT perspective. So I'll say more about that as I go along. So where should we start? Well, a good place to start might be at the end, and you're looking at this and going, a tombstone? What is this woman about? She's going to talk about my death. And actually, yes, I am. So the first thing that I want you to be open to is the idea that to get in touch with your values, one of the strongest ways to do it is to take an end-of-life perspective. If you want to, you could close your eyes for a moment. I'm not going to change the slide. There's nothing to see, just so that you could concentrate a little bit better. And I'm going to ask you to think about the end of your own life. I'm going to ask you to go to a place where perhaps it's your funeral or some other observance of the end of your life, and someone is giving your eulogy. Yeah, I know. They're talking about you and about your life. And as you listen, because in some strange way, you can be there and you can listen to it, you hear them talking about your life in exactly the way that you would want to hear someone speak about your life. Think of this as a person who knows your soul, who knows you, who really understands what you're about. And as they talk about your life, they say what you stood for. And they say 2 or maybe 3 things that they saw enacted in your life ways that they saw you behave that let them know precisely what you stood for. And as you listen to the eulogy, you're filled with a sense of pride that that was the life that you had, that those were the things that you enacted. I'll bring you back now into the present, take you away from that somewhat strange beginning, and speak for a moment about what I hope that we'll do together here this evening. There are some, what I would call the official objectives tonight. I would like to, as we go along through our presentation tonight, give you kind of a context for values, tell you just a little bit about where values have been considered in other places and what has been studied and observed about values. I'll do just a little bit of that. I'm going to introduce acceptance and commitment processes. I spoke to you before about ACT, A-C-T, acceptance and commitment therapy. So there are two parts to ACT, acceptance and commitment. And I want to go over the processes that are part of acceptance and the processes that are part of commitment. I'll highlight some of the research evidence that relates to those processes. As I said to you before, ACT is an evidence-based practice, so I'd like to tell you a little bit about that. Certainly we won't have enough time to get to all of those, but I'll highlight a few things. And finally, and this is what I'll spend most of our time together on, I'd like to present to you a process for identifying and enacting your own values in your life. Now, I don't come to this with the assumption that you haven't already done a lot of this work on your own. Many of you may have thought already quite deeply about your values and be acting in accordance with them. There may be other people here tonight for whom this is a topic you haven't given much thought. Either way, I hope that there will be things of value for you. For those of you who have a well-developed sense of your own values, perhaps some of the things that I'll talk about that have to do with how to overcome barriers to enacting your values will be important. For others, maybe just identifying core values will be an important thing for you to do tonight. I also have a personal objective. When I was asked to speak at this series, one of the reasons I said yes was because the theme of health and wellness meant that I could talk about values. And one of my personal values, a core value for me, is to make a difference in the world by helping other people to help themselves. It's part of what I do as a teacher. It's part of what I do as a psychotherapist. It's where my research is directed. So in a sense, by being here with you tonight, if I'm able to inspire a couple of people, I will have made a difference, enacted one of my own values. So this is the 2-minute history of the study of values. And it's not by any means meant to be comprehensive, just to sort of highlight the fact that what I'm going to tell you about tonight is a particular way of thinking about values. But values have been talked about and studied for centuries in philosophy and in religion. Where concepts like existence, consciousness, happiness, free will, the existence of God, all of these things have to do with the meaning of life. And the meaning of life and values are very much connected. There are, however, different kinds of answers that have been given by science, answers given by neuroscientists that have to do with theories of reward and pleasure and motivation, what happens in the limbic system, what happens with your neurotransmitters, how people look for pleasure in their lives, has been extensively studied. And for a long time, psychologists took the perspective that life was about pursuing pleasure. So that's been a very important part of the study in psychology. In social psychology, this is just an example, there's something called terror management theory that says that we develop that what we're doing in our lives is we're running away from death. Our activities are about managing our fear of dying, and our values are selected to escape from the reminder of our own imminent death. Humanistic psychology has extensively talked about values, about using our personal strengths, about finding a meaning outside ourselves. Positive psychology, which is a relatively new field, really in the last 15 years or so, the positive psychology movement has been very active, but the ideas of positive psychology aren't necessarily new. Some of the scientific orientation to those ideas is new. All of these scientific answers and the religion and philosophical answers attempt to deal with what is the meaning in life. What we'll talk about here tonight is more what is the meaning of my life and your life. So not so much the big question of is there a meaning out there that we all should ascribe to, but is there a meaning in here that I can discover and work with? Okay. Basic premises of acceptance and commitment processes. So if you want to think of values as being like a lighthouse, the lighthouse keeper turns on the light, and that's the process of discovering our values. What is he turning the light on, or she turning the light on? I guess it's all done electronically these days, but what's happening is the light is shining into the darkness, usually onto the sea. And the sea might be understood to be what happens in the world, what happens in the world in general. The sea is always moving, the world is always changing, and it's always there. So there's this large sea, and you're out there trying to navigate your boat through the sea. And internal willingness is about accepting what is out there in the sea. So there's a rocky coastline, there's rocks that you need to navigate around near the shore. And those things are, in this idea of what acceptance is, those things are your thoughts and feelings. And what internal willingness is about accepting those thoughts and feelings, not trying to change them. We have often in psychology tried to help people change how they think and change how they feel. In what we're talking about here is not changing how you think and not trying to change how you feel, but accepting that the way you think and feel is just what it is. That's what internal willingness is, and that's what the acceptance part of this process is about. External willingness is about the commitment part. It's about identifying the values. It's about, in a sense, seeing how we can live out what we value. So there are probably as many things that people can value as there are people in the world. Your eulogy, I hope that you were able to imagine something, may have pointed you to some of the things that are valuable to you. But every time we do something, there is a potential in that action for it to be value-based. Anything that is purposive, can be value-based. So our our commitment is our external willingness, our willingness to engage in a value-driven and purposive life. In order to do this, there are really 4 processes that are important. There are 4 processes that are important to acceptance. The internal willingness part, sort of a general idea of what acceptance is itself, something called cognitive defusion, presence in the here and now. I know that Nancy Heath spoke to you a few weeks ago if you were here, and she talked to you about mindfulness. So some of this is probably ringing a bell because this approach is very much a mindfulness-based approach. Acceptance is about mindfulness in many cases. And it's also the 4th idea that has to do with internal willingness or acceptance is awareness of context. I'll go through these in a little bit more detail. Okay. So acceptance or willingness. This is about being open to your whole experience. Now, I said to you before that I had done some alliance research and that I was very interested in openness, and that our participants had told us that when the alliance was developing well, they were experiencing an increased openness to their therapist. That's not a unique finding. Back in the mid-'80s, David Orlinsky and Ken Howard did a large review of the literature and looked at over 1,100 psychotherapy studies at that point. And what they found was that self-relatedness, lack of defensiveness, openness, the constructs were defined using different words, but the basic idea was there, that when people were open, they did better in therapy. They had better outcomes, all kinds of different better outcomes. So acceptance is about being open to your experience. But how do we do that? Now, Stephen Hayes, who developed ACT, has something he calls relational frame theory. Relational frame theory is really complicated, but one of its basic premises is that thinking can be a problem. And now, you think, she's a professor, she's standing up there and saying thinking can be a problem, like what kind of woman is this? But he takes this as a particular perspective. So we think of thinking as our great strength. It's the thing that separates us from other species. It's our pride and joy in a sense. But what Hayes says is that verbal problem solving and reasoning are based on some of the same processes that actually lead to psychopathology. And just to illustrate this to you, I'd like to just do a little straw poll here. How many of you in the room occasionally suffer from insomnia? Okay, good. So what you are doing is worrying about things. And if we think about that from a psychopathology perspective, we might call that rumination, going over and over and over and over the same thing. I do that when I can't sleep at night. It's not like I can think through a problem, be done with it, and go back to sleep, or even go on to the next one. I have to go back and back and over and over and over. What we need to differentiate is rumination and problem solving. Okay, so let me give you an example here of the difference between rumination and problem solving. And I'll take the example of the environment. So if I'm if I care about the environment, I'm environmentally conscious, I want to make sure that there's a good world to pass on to future generations, then what I need to do is I need to be active and problem solve around that. So I need to recycle my garbage. I need to turn off my lights when I'm not in the room. I need to brush my teeth without the water running. I need to drive less and walk more. There's any number of things that I can do to be active and in a problem-solving mode relative to the environment. But if I lie awake at night thinking we're all going to burn, that's not problem-solving. And if I worry about what's going to happen and it doesn't lead me to action, now I'm ruminating and not problem-solving. And it's this kind of thinking, this thinking that goes in circles where we get stuck on an idea that is a problem. Another thing that Hayes says in relational frame theory is that it's not reasonable to think that cognitive networks can be logically restricted or eliminated. Let me just translate that for you. What he's saying is that we can't unlearn our thinking. Okay? I don't know if you've ever tried to unlearn something. Do you ever get a song that goes around in your head? I'd like you, if you can, to think of a pink elephant quartet. Okay? Nice big pink elephants with ears that stand up and trunks that are playing the clarinet. Okay? Just try and get that image in your mind, if you can, of a pink elephant quartet. Think about how pink the elephants are, how they have sort of little pointy hooves. Okay? And now, if you can, I would like you to try to not think of pink elephants. Okay, I don't want you to think of pink elephants no matter what, okay? Try not to think of pink elephants. Well, what thought suppression studies tell us, and thought suppression studies are just what I've done to you, telling people to think of something and telling them not to think of it. What thought suppression studies tell us is that the effort to suppress something, trying not to think about it, actually causes us to think about it more. So what we don't want to have, we will end up having more of. And this is the problem. This is the problem with language, is that having learned something, having thought something, and then trying to undo it is problematic. So trying to control it or suppress it is the problem. So what's the solution? Well, the solution is acceptance, which is the opposite of avoidance. Acceptance is active and intentional. It says, this is the way I think. This is the way I feel. It is what it is. I don't try to make it any different than what it is. I'll tell you a little bit more about how you do that in a minute. But I just have a little tip for you here. If thoughts become a problem for you and you become very attached to them, one of the things that we do in psychotherapy is we tell people to set aside particular time for difficult thoughts so that we don't engage their avoidance and you don't engage yourself in trying to suppress a thought. The second acceptance process that I said I'd talk about is cognitive defusion. And cognitive fusion, the opposite of defusion, is confusing a thought with the thing itself. Okay, so when we use language, and when we use language to problem solve, we do that based on our ability to imagine. So I'm preparing tonight for my presentation, or I'm preparing for the last week and a half for this presentation. But having said that, as I was doing it, I tried to imagine you all here. I imagined what you might already know and what might be interesting to you, how I might present things, what order should things go through. As I'm doing that, I'm problem solving. But I did a lot of other stuff too. I also imagined that there were people out there saying, this is all so boring and so obvious. And what do you think when I imagined that I thought or felt? Just a guess. Sad, nervous, yeah. Anything else? Nervous is good. I worried that maybe I didn't have enough slides, maybe there wasn't enough content, maybe I'd run out of material. What do you think I thought or felt when I had that thought? I judged myself. I thought, maybe I'm not putting enough effort into this. I thought about the question period. What if I can't answer a question? Then I felt, I'll look incompetent. They won't think very well of me. And I had those feelings as if it was actually happening to me. Okay? So what I felt when I felt incompetent, or I felt foolish, or I felt like I wasn't going to do a good job, the way that felt inside me is exactly the same way as it would have been if it actually happened here tonight. There's an old expression that my father used to say to me, the coward dies 1,000 deaths, the brave man dies but once. The idea being that we can imagine our death, we can imagine bad things happening to us over and over and over again. We actually only have to go through it one time. So the problem here, the cognitive fusion problem, if you will, is treating our thoughts and feelings as if they were real. Okay, so I'm having this imagination about what's going to happen in my presentation tonight, and internally, I treat it exactly as if it was actually happening. That's cognitive fusion. But the reality is that we don't need to be fused with most of our thoughts. We don't need to hold on to them quite so tightly, because in fact, as we all know from our own life experience, our thoughts change. And we'll just do a little thought experiment here to prove that to you, if you like. If you'd like to go back to your life when you were 13 years old, 15 years old, something like that. No, somebody said, no, I don't want to go back there. Okay. Those of you who are willing can go back to adolescence. And you might remember at that time your first love and how sure you were that this would last forever and how wonderful it was. This person who disappeared from your life 10 or 20 or 50 years ago. Or you might remember passionate political views, things that you really, really believed at the time that now you go kind of, oh my. I was an adolescent in the 60s, and Jane Fonda told us to never trust anyone over 30, and I'm standing up here today, and I'm sure as hell over 30. So the things that seemed really important to me then, those thoughts have changed. The same thing with feelings. Our feelings change all the time. It's the nature of thoughts and feelings to change constantly. But when we become attached to them, when we become fused to what is actually changeable, we're not in a good place to make life decisions. And this idea of a fish jumping out of the bowl, this is the first time the fish gets to see the water when he jumps out of the bowl, because for the rest of his life, it's been his context. And this is one of the ways that we actually become defused, is looking a little bit at the context. I'll talk in a minute about that. So I know that when Nancy was here a few weeks ago, she did a mindfulness meditation with you, and I'd like to do something similar as a way to underline for you the idea of being present in the here and now, of present moment awareness. This is one that I find personally quite useful because it has a visual component to it, and it has to do with putting our thoughts and feelings on a stream, on a leaf. Okay, so if you want to just imagine yourself, and again, if you want to close your eyes, feel free, you don't have to. And you can do that for a long time. As you do it, one of the things that happens is you take a distance from your thoughts, you take a distance from your feelings, and you just watch them. Watching them, becoming mindful, is what present moment awareness really is. It's not living in the past, it's not living in the future, it's living right here in this present moment. I'm reading my notes here. I say, tip, I notice that I'm thinking. Okay, this is something that I sometimes do with my clients in my psychotherapy practice when they're getting stuck with an idea that isn't useful to them. It's not a problem-solving idea. It's not something that they can use in their life. They're just stuck with it. And one of the ways that I encourage them to develop awareness to look at the idea is to take the idea, however it occurs to them, and put, I notice that I am thinking in front of it. So when I take the idea that I must do a good presentation tonight, and that raises anxiety inside me, I can take that idea and I can say to myself, oh, I notice that I'm thinking that I must do a good presentation tonight. It encourages a different way of being in relationship to that thought. I'm not trying to control the thought. I'm not trying to make it go away. I'm not trying to do anything with it. I'm just being present to it and noticing it. And it's quite an effective way to become aware of our thoughts and feelings. Because if we hope to become defused, and remember all of this is context for values, which we're going to get to very shortly, we need to have a different relationship with our thoughts and feelings. A final metaphor that has to do with this whole process of acceptance and diffusion is the metaphor of a chessboard. Here we can think about there are two parts. There is the board and there are the pieces. The pieces are your thoughts and feelings, and the board is you. Okay? If you think about chess, I don't know if you play or not, but I think most of us know what the game is. The pieces are usually black and white. And so are our thoughts, right? particularly emotional thoughts. There are the good thoughts and the bad thoughts, the ones we like and the ones we don't like. And often they fight it out with one another, similar to the game of chess. The pieces are lined up and the play is one side against the other. The pieces threaten one another. They don't threaten the board. The board, in a sense, is just there. The pieces can come and go. They're typically in the game of chess lost gradually until only the pieces on the winning side, only the king on the winning side remains. The queen? I don't play chess. Which is it? The king. Makes sense. So pieces can come and go. They can be lost. But the board stays. The board is still there. And in fact, the board has no investment in how the game turns out. The board is the board. It's there when the whites win, and it's there when the blacks win. So if you can use that as an analogy, as a metaphor, to think about the kind of relationship you want to have to your thoughts and feelings, you would like to have this kind of relationship where you're the chessboard and the thoughts and feelings duke it out, but your investment in that is only when those thoughts are useful for problem solving. Okay. I said I'd present some research to you that has to do with ACT processes, and I'll do that. First of all, I will tell you that there are a number of studies out there, in the hundreds now, of both correlational, experimental, component studies, outcome studies, all of these different kinds of studies, that generally the studies support the things that I'm telling you tonight. There's not very much of a minority report here, and that is they support the idea that experiential avoidance is related to a large range of psychological disorders. So avoiding our thoughts and feelings isn't a good thing. And the component studies, the studies that break down the different processes of acceptance and commitment, show that acceptance-based protocols are usually more efficacious than control-based protocols. So when people are trained to accept their thoughts as opposed to trying to control their thoughts, they generally do better. I'll talk to you just about a few studies. A pain tolerance study that was a very interesting thing. Pain tolerance is about getting people to put up with really obnoxious things. So they ask people to put their hands in really, really cold water until it really hurts. And in this particular study that I'm talking to you about, there was one group that I'll call the acceptance group that got instruction in how to accept difficult thoughts and feelings. There was another group who got instruction in how to accept and how also to engage in valued activity. And the participants were asked to nominate a top value, and then the experimenter asked them, so for example, asked them how they would tolerate pain with respect to that value. So for example, if someone said, my family is very important value to me, being with my family is very important, the experimenter asked them how much pain they would tolerate. Would they jump into an icy lake in order to save a member of their family, for example? It was very simple. The intervention, the acceptance intervention, the acceptance plus values interventions were only 20 minutes. Less time than I'm spending talking to you here tonight about these same things. The control group had no instruction. All groups, when they were asked to put their hand in the cold water, reported the same pain. Okay, so everybody that rated their pain about the same, but the ability to tolerate it was greatest in the acceptance plus values group. So the group that was able to go through most were the people who were pulling on this idea of, I would do this because it's important for me. A diabetes study where people were given a diabetes education workshop, and then another group was given the education workshop with some ACT processes about mindfulness and values-based action. What they found was that There were self-management improved in both groups, but diabetic control, the ability to actually do things that reduced their diabetes symptoms, was best in the group that received the ACT intervention. A burnout and stigmatization study in which they were helping professionals, people like me, and trying to reduce stigmatization about seeking mental health treatment among this group. They gave them either an ACT intervention or a multicultural awareness training. What they found was that both groups reduced their stigmatization, which was part of it, but that the group that received the ACT intervention also reported less burnout symptoms at a follow-up time. Smoking. There was a protocol given an ACT protocol that taught people to focus on their internal triggers, practice constructive actions, accept what they couldn't change, and make public commitments. Bookmark that because I'm going to talk about it more. The ACT group, the group that had that, produced better long-term results in smoking cessation than people who did nicotine replacement therapy, which is an effective treatment for smoking cessation. A stress study in which improvements in mental health in the ACT condition were mediated or made greater by the acceptance of undesirable thoughts and feelings. So when people were able to accept their undesirable thoughts and feelings, they experienced less stress. And an epilepsy study in which patients received training in the core ACT processes, and an experimental group received the same number of hours of treatment, but with therapists who just reflected on their epilepsy in a non-judgmental way, found that the ACT group, that the seizures of the epileptic seizures of the groups the improvement in seizures was mediated by values attainment, and that the quality of life that the groups reported was mediated by a combination of values attainment and persistent action in the face of a barrier. So these are just a sampling of the kind of studies that are out there that look at the processes that I've been talking to you about, the acceptance process, and now what we'll turn to is the values process. So why do we need to engage with values? We need to engage with values because they provide a direction for our efforts. They connect us to meaning and purpose in our lives. They motivate engagement. They actually reduce defensiveness. So there are steps that we can take to clarify values. And the steps are listed here. I'll go through them one by one and tell you a little bit about what those steps mean. First of all, we want to create if we want to be able to act on our values, we need to create a distance from social rules. And what that means is our behaviors are under many sources of control. There's lots of things that influence us in how we want to behave. So I can decide, or not me particularly, but an adolescent might decide that he or she wanted to be a doctor. She might want to be a doctor because it's good money. She might want to be a doctor because it's prestigious or because she can set her own hours. She might want to be a doctor to help people. She might want to be a doctor for many of these reasons, not just one. But there are differences between making a choice based on social rules or how things look to us and based on natural learning. And what is natural learning? Natural learning is learning that looks inside ourselves. Okay, so I'll tell you a little bit about some research that was conducted in my own lab. I was interested in measuring the emotion of interest and in using vocal parameters to do that. So the study had nothing to do with values in the beginning. But because I knew about ACT, the protocol that we used to get people interested so we could measure their voices was a protocol in which we asked them to reflect upon their values. And remember that this study was designed for something very different. So the results that we have are mostly observational at this point and are going to be followed up. But they speak very much to this idea of having an internal compass. Because what we found is that when we asked people what they valued, and we kept pushing them a little bit to say, well, why do you value that? Why do you value that? Why do you value that? That we found two different kinds of people who had kind of an internal compass and people who were more externally oriented. And the people who had an internal compass said things to us like, well, I value family. Well, why do you value family? I value family because I want somebody always at my back. I want to know that somebody's with me. Why do you want to have somebody at your back? I want to have somebody at my back because I'm going out into the world. I want to explore. I want to do things. I want to make a difference. Why do you want to make a difference? Because I do. Because I want to make a difference because my life would be wasted if I didn't. We had another group who looked at, who valued things that gave them more, I don't know if recognition might be a better word. So a group that would say, what do you want? I want a good job. Why do you want it? I want it so I can have financial security. Why do you want financial security? So I don't have to rely on everyone. Why do you want not to have to rely on anyone? On anyone. Because I want to know that my importance in the world is about me and that I am truly important. These were people who wanted more recognition. Now, as I said to you before, this was a study of vocal parameters. It was not a study of values. So these findings are suggestive more than anything else, but they really speak to this idea that we can have things that we value because it's inside us, or things that we value because the world tells us we should value them. And that in terms of creating and living by values effectively, the internal compass will be more effective. The second step in valuing is defining values, finding things that are freely chosen, that are dynamic and evolving. Freely chosen means, of course, that you don't have to do it. It's what you want. Dynamic and evolving means that it changes all the time. So, for example, there are students in the room, and some of those students might say, well, one of the things I want is to have a PhD. That would not be a value. That would be a goal. Now, it might be a way to enact a value. It might be a way, the goal might be, I want to be someone who's always curious and always learning about the world. And one of my steps in that is to get a PhD. So the PhD might represent a goal, but it's unlikely that it would represent a value. And the reason is that values are never attained. Values are something that's ongoing. We never get there. We just keep trying. We go through these patterns of activity. So values change over time. So for example, if we think about the internal compass and how we learned, if one of your values were caring, one of your early experiences would probably be caring in your childhood. Maybe you had a puppy and you had to feed it and you had to take it out and you had to care for it. Caring, and you learned naturally about that internal valuing. In adolescence, maybe you visited a sick grandmother. When you were adults, you maybe cared for children. In retirement, you maybe did some volunteering. So the value of caring would be enacted and would look differently over the course of life. It would be dynamic and evolving with these different patterns of activity, but the value behind it would be the same. Values establish intrinsic reinforces. What that means is just that living out my value has a sense of integrity to it. That not that it always feels good. Sometimes when I'm living out my values, it's not what I really want to do. It's not the most fun thing. But it has a sense of rightness to it that is an intrinsic reinforcement. Okay. If you have handouts, I think. If you go to, I think it's the second last page of your handout, you'll see a list that looks something like this. You have that? These are some of the areas that Kelly Wilson at Ole Miss has identified as areas in which people often have personal values. As I said to you before, they're not the only areas. There's as many values as there are people. But these are the domains in which people have values. And I would just ask you, if you could, to think back to the eulogy that you gave yourself at the beginning of today's presentation. And as you think of that, think about any values that came through for you, and did they relate in any of these domains? We identify something first that we hope to have in our lives. The example I gave you before was the PhD, or you want to have more time. But it's the thing that we want to use it for. It's what we hope to become. So, for example, if I said to you, at the end of your life, would you like to be known as the woman who had a lot of time? It's a rhetorical question, I'm sorry. Probably that's not the most important thing. Probably there's something that you would do with time that it will take you closer to a value. So using the rules, the definition that I gave you before, you might examine the values you've written down later on when you leave tonight, or later on when you have some time, and think about constructing them in a way that they are going to lead you toward valued action. One of the things that I do when I work with clients, I work extensively with values, and one of the, not everyone, but some people have a big list. So some people would see that list of 12 or 13 domains and say, oh yeah, I like that, and that, and that, and that. Yep, that's a good one. That one's for me. One of the things that it's important to do is to rate our narratives for importance. So if you had 12 narratives, and clearly you didn't have time to write them, 12 of them tonight, but if you had 12 narratives, you'd want to rank them from highest importance to lowest importance. You can use your eulogy as a guideline again to do this. You can think about the things you dreamed about as a child, and while they might not still be the most important things to you, they may tell you something about what you still value. You can think of the things that you feel good doing right now, the things that in your life give you this sense of, yeah, that was a great thing to do. Sometimes it's just a great thing to do because it's fun, but sometimes it's a great thing to do because we're actually enacting in value. And finally, ask yourself, would I do this thing if nobody knew I was doing about it? 5 minutes? Oh my. Okay. If the answer is no, I wouldn't do it if someone was watching, then it's probably not an internal value. You have a values map, and this is something that you could fill in, and in order to work with this, I'll talk to you about how to set goals. But once we've identified what we value, what's important to do is to assess how consistent our current actions are with those values. So when we identify a valued area, you can ask yourself, how important is this area at this time of your life? How important is it to your life as a whole? Are you acting in service of this value? How concerned are you about this area? This will help you to assess whether or not you're actually acting in concert with this value. You can rate that on some kind of scale. You can develop your own scale. The scale's not terribly important. But once you have your values, the next step is to choose the actions that are consistent with the values, because values are action-based. In this way of thinking. They're not action-based in philosophy and religion and all those other ways that I talked to you about earlier. But in this way of thinking about values, they should lead to goals. And goals are best when they're specific and measurable. Okay, so when we can actually decide that what can be done, when, where, how, Those are the things that make goal specific and measurable. When you're someone who could actually do this, so a goal that could be accomplished by Nelson Mandela but can't be accomplished by you is not probably a good goal. You need to avoid dead man goals. Dead man goals are goals that a dead man could do better than you. And generally, they are things that you want not to do. So I want to do less of this, or I don't want to do this anymore. Somebody who was dead could do that better than you. The next thing you want to do is you want to make public commitments about your goals. Tell somebody. Tell them what you're planning to do. It sharpens our need to do it when we know someone is watching. Link those goals that you develop clearly to values. And I've given you a little bit of an example. This is my own life. I identified a value a while ago that I want to be a person who is caring, as a daughter, as a sister, as an aunt, as a wife. And I want my actions to show the people in my family that they're important to me. So my long-term goal is to show people how I love and care for them in my family. But my short-term goals are very specific things that I need to do in order to do that. So, for example, I invite my family for a weekend in the summer. And we all get together for a few days at Christmas as a whole group. Each year I bring my nieces to come and see me again for a weekend, just to hang out and be with one another. I recently lost my father, and I visit now more regularly with my mother because that's an important thing for me to do. And I have, since my father died, made it important to me to call my mother every night at 6 o'clock. My mother has Alzheimer's and has trouble holding on to things, so it's important to her that that's a regular thing. And being public about this, saying it to you, saying it to other people, telling people I'm doing this, makes it more likely that I will do it in the future. I have to tell you, I don't hold myself up as some sort of an example here. There are some times I don't live up to these commitments. But nonetheless, this is where, these are my objectives, the place that I'm going. There are barriers that will come up, needing to have all your problems solved before you begin. So I can't take action until, I can't be more outgoing until I lose weight. I can't try this thing until I have a better education. Striving for secondary reinforcers. Secondary reinforcers are things like money and power and prestige. If you wouldn't do it if somebody else was watching, it's probably not your value. If you're making goals in service of that, you may be doing something that's very interesting with your life, but you're probably not living up your values. And finally, keeping up appearances. I gave you in your handouts a little log that you can fill in when you get into trouble. If you're having trouble living out your values, you can use the log to rate those things. And note on it the kinds of barriers, the things that keep you from doing what you want to do. So work pressure keeps me from traveling to Toronto to see my family. Wanting to do more fun things on the weekend might keep me from having one of these family weekends, which are important to me, but they're not always fun. And feeling that I can't do something because I'm scheduled and I have a schedule and I can't get to it. So, for example, tonight I called my mother at 6 o'clock. I was told to be here for 6:10. And there was a part of me that was going, come on, Marilyn, you've got a presentation to give. You can skip one night. I called my mother for 2 minutes. She was happy, and I felt like I was enacting a value that's important in my life. Okay. There are some things that you can help yourself, little ways to help yourself remember what to do when you're having trouble enacting your values, the positive things and the negative things. In particular, the positive things. Accept your thoughts and feelings. Choose where you're going. Choose an action, make a plan, follow it through, and then take that action, enact it. Okay. The passengers on the bus. This is one of the primary act metaphors, and I think it's a very important one because it's one that puts the whole thing together for us. So this is a bus, and the driver is you. And as you're driving, you have a route. You have stops, places you're supposed to go to. Your route is your valued direction. It's the direction that your life is going to take. It's the way that you want to go. The stops, they're your goals. And your job is to get the bus along the route. That's what your life is about if it's going to be value-driven. The problem is the passengers. Those passengers. Those passengers are your thoughts and feelings. And you sometimes have passengers that fight with one another. And as a bus driver, you want to get up and throw them off the bus. You want to get rid of them. You want to control them. But if you're fighting with the passengers and throwing them off the bus, you're not moving along the route. And sometimes you see passengers and you think, oh, that was the guy that fought on my bus the other day. Let me just turn down here so I can avoid him. I won't even go to that stop. That's avoidance. You're not moving the bus in your valued direction. Passengers, and those are the thoughts that distract you, that cause you to make a wrong turn. The important thing here is, in spite of the passengers on the bus, they're just there. They're part of the ride. You have to accept them. They're your thoughts, your feelings. Try not to avoid them, not to control them, and keep your bus moving in that valued direction. So I thank you for your time and attention, and I toast you and wish you a valuable life.